Hey everybody, it's Carter, and welcome to this episode of Making It Up, the conversation series where two authors kind of sit down and just chew the fat for a little while. Compare notes, compare highs and lows, and all that good stuff. And I'm having a blast doing this, and I love talking to these people because I always learn something from them. And I always when I'm done with the conversation, I always feel like energized, like I want to go right. So that's a good sign. And today's guest, certainly made me feel that way just because of, how humble she is and how successful she is. Today I had on the show Clare Mackintosh. And one glance at her Wikipedia page will let you know that she's a British author and former police officer. Her novels are published in more than 35 languages and have sold more than 2 million copies worldwide. So, yeah, she's kind of a big deal. She writes thrillers. I saw her at Thriller Fest. I was fortunate enough to be able to hang out with her for a little while after we had actually recorded this episode. So it was nice to meet her in person. And she's awesome, and she has a fantastic sense of humor. She writes dark stuff like all of us, and she's very successful at doing it. Her latest book is called The Last Party, and that was out this April. So yeah, this was a wonderful, it's the kind of conversation where, you go in, to one of these things and you're not really sure who this person is, or you've never really spoken with them before and you're not really sure how it's going to go. And then there's just this connection. There's like a very casual, the ability to kind of just sit and just ask real questions to one another. And she gave me the highest compliment, towards the end of the interview. She said, it felt like a therapy session. So that made me happy. Anyway, I hope you enjoy this. This is my conversation with Clare Mackintosh.
Hi.
How are you?
I'm good. Thank you so much for doing this.
Well, no, the pleasure is mine. I appreciate it. I think you're many, many hours ahead of me, aren't you? Where are you?
I'm in Wales in the UK, and it is 5 here, 5 p.m.
So you have your cocktail?
Not yet, because I've done no work today, so I'm going to have to do some writing later.
Oh, that's when I do my best work.
Yeah, well, maybe I should try it. So what time is it there?
It's 10 a.m. I'm in Colorado. So,
nice.
A beautiful spring day.
Warmer. Yeah.
Yes,
nice.
It's lovely. I just went for a bike ride, so I'm still drying sweat here. So
nice. Thanks for that, Emmett.
You're welcome. So how you been? How are you? It's nice to meet you. I've been excited for this conversation.
Are you going to Thriller Fest by any chance?
I am. Yeah, I'm actually going to New York. My niece is graduating from college in upstate New York a few days before, and then I'm taking the shuttle down. I'm teaching a class at Craft Fest, and then I will be attending the conference. Yourself?
Brilliant. So I am teaching a masterclass on the Monday.
Okay.
And then a Craft Fest session on structure, I think, on maybe Wednesday, something like that. So I'm there all week, basically.
Wow, you're busy.
Yeah, busy, but some time in between as well. So it'd be great to, hook up, meet in person, have a drink.
Absolutely. How are you feeling about being in New York City for a week?
I'm excited. To be honest, I'm just looking forward to being away from my family. That's really my overriding sort of motivation. So yeah, I'll be jet lagged. I'll be tired. I'll have, loads of work to do. I've got to write while I'm there, but I won't have children or animals or anything to look after. So
how old are your children?
15, 14, and 14. How about yours? That's a dad mug, right? I saw.
It is. Yeah. My girl just finished her first year at Michigan State. So she's 18 and my son is 16. So it's at the point now where it's pretty mellow. She's gone most of the time. And, I've been missing her. And then my son, he's driving. So He's never around. So yeah, it's that big leap. At what point in Wales can your kids drive?
17.
Okay.
Yeah, so my eldest will be 16 at the end of this year. So we've got, another 18 months before he's on the road. But they're, I don't see a lot of them. It's true. They're kind of, they're out at the gym or with friends. So it's a much easier phase of life, but it's still like emotionally they need you at this age. They're not
totally
quite adults yet. So
yeah, I know. And it's weird because then they start doing things that are very adult, like, you're like, wow, that surprises me that you have this kind of maturity. And then on the other side, sometimes you're just like,
they're complete idiots. Yeah.
How are you such an idiot? Yeah, it's a lot of second guessing. And I feel like my son, like he's amazingly mature, but he forgets everything. Like you tell him to do something and like within seconds, it's gone from his head.
I mean, to be fair, I do know adults like that. So.
Right. Yeah, I guess I'm kind of like that too. So,
so what's the? I can't remember whether this is just audio or video.
Oh no, it's video as well.
Good job, I got dressed, isn't it?
It's okay. Most people download it as a podcast. So,
okay.
but you look lovely, so you're all good. Are you?
Thanks.
Are you born and raised in Wales or?
No, south of England.
Okay. And what were your parents doing when you were growing up? Like, what kind of line of work were they in?
My dad was a doctor, a pathologist.
Okay.
Is that the same word in America? Yep,
for sure.
And my mum kind of looked after us and the house, so fairly sort of stereotypical mum at home upbringing. Yep.
Same for me. My dad wasn't a pathologist; he was an engineer, but much smarter than me. Very different side of the brain. Did you have any interest when you were growing up to maybe go into medicine, or were you always kind of interested in the creative arts?
No, I cannot add up really. I have no scientific or maths bent at all. It's all about the words and the languages for me. So I was French, German, English, all the arts, dance, drama, music. And yeah, just wanted to write really right from the start.
Do you? I always find it so interesting, people's origin stories and kind of what it was that kind of made them so interested. So because to be interested in anything, as in terms of career as a kid is pretty rare to have any kind of direction at all.
Yes, it is. And yet we ask kids all the time.
Which is wrong.
It's like one of those standard questions, isn't it? So what do you want to do when you grow up, when you leave school? And it's so much pressure.
It is. But it's speaking from the perspective of a father who now is going through the whole thing with one kid in college, I totally agree with you. I don't think you should have any idea, because I had a very firm idea and I didn't start writing until I was 33. So I totally changed. So everybody changes. On the other hand, you save up for 18 years for university. And then, once they start switching majors, you're adding on another year. And in the US, that's okay. You're adding on another $60,000. So you kind of want your kids to have some kind of direction.
Some idea, yeah.
But why should they? Like it's
no. But I think that's that's such a huge change from when I was growing up, because when I went to university, it was free. So
that's helpful.
It's really helpful. So going to university, those 3 or 4 years at university were more about growing up. They were more about living independently, about, figuring out who you were and what you wanted to do, and getting a free degree at the same time. Whereas now it's not free in the UK anymore. Actually, I think there's an argument for not going to university unless you've got a clear path that necessitates it. Otherwise, it's a lot of debt for potentially not a lot of gain.
Right. You start looking at, how many people do you know or your contemporaries who went to university with you who are doing what they studied? And it's very few. Very few.
Absolutely.
But there are a lot of benefits as well. And there's a maturation process that happens very quickly, hopefully, in college that I think is helpful.
I grew up really jealous of American teenagers just because it all looks so glamorous. So we don't have things like frat parties and sororities. And I just was desperate to be part of some kind of, club, some kind of organization like that. I'm still a bit obsessed with those kind of films that show those wild parties and houses, like really gorgeous houses that I would love to live in with my family, occupied by students. It's crazy.
Well, I'll tell you, I went to Cornell, and there's not much there except for, so the Greek system was huge. And so lots of those big, gorgeous houses, and they're disgusting inside. And the parties aren't that fun at all. And I was never in a fraternity because I'm like, this is just stupid. So, grass is always greener, I assume. So what did you study then? You studied...
I studied French, and I had a bit of a kind of a plot twist of a degree because I did want to write, but I didn't see it as a career. It didn't feel like a possible career choice.
That's usually a very smart decision.
Well, yeah. and yes, absolutely. And if I had have seen it as a career, I don't think I could have made anything of it. But I didn't have any role models, anyone who worked in the arts at all. Like everyone I knew were doctors, lawyers, they worked in shops, in offices, teachers, they had jobs. They weren't
no mentor.
Painting or so I just picked subjects that I liked. I picked French and German, and then I spent a year in Paris, became fluent in French, forgot all my German and panicked about doing a degree in it. So I switched to business studies. So I did a degree in French and business, which actually was kind of useful. And I use my French a lot now. I go to France, I promote my books, I do my interviews in French, my TV, radio in French. And business, well, being an author's a business. We're CEOs of our companies, and it doesn't hurt to know how to read a balance sheet.
For sure. And I'm interested in particular to talk to you kind of along those lines as well, because my background is all business. And, so I approach publishing with intense curiosity about the industry itself and the inner workings and the data, and the promotion and the marketing and all the stuff that the author needs to do. But most authors honestly aren't very business minded at all. And all that stuff is a struggle. So you graduated with that degree in business. And then what were your first jobs? So my degree was 4 years, and the third year was back in Paris. So I'd already spent a year in Paris. I went back to Paris. I got a job as a bilingual secretary in a commercial property firm. So kind of a company buying up big office blocks and pension property. Learned a lot of business French, learned more about business, came back to the UK, finished my degree, and was going to carry on in that kind of line of work. Thought about management consultancy. So that was where I was heading. Mm-hmm. And actually that would have suited me quite well. I'm ultimately a problem solver, and I also have a very short attention span. So going into a company for 6 months and then coming out of it is pretty well suited. But I went into the wrong room. I was supposed to be going to a careers lecture delivered by a management consulting firm, and I was late, and I ran into the lecture theatre, and I was sort of a bit awkward, sorry to be late, sat down, looked up, and there were police officers at the front of the room. And I felt I couldn't really leave. I'd made such a big song and dance about coming in late. So I sat and I listened, and it totally blew my mind that I had never considered a career as a police officer. And
here was this job being presented to me that wasn't just one job. It was dozens of jobs under one roof. You know, I could be on the mounted section riding horses. I could be traffic police. I could be armed police. I could do so many different, I could be a detective, forensics. And I just thought this is incredible. And it sort of tallied with something that I'd been struggling with for most of my last year at university, which was, I don't think I can do a job that's just about earning money. And I had kind of carried that with me while I was working in Paris, and it had been very much about making money, you know, pensions for other people, money for your clients, money for yourself. And my father, who was a doctor for all his career in the National Health Service here in the UK, was by default very sort of public-minded. And I think I just inherited from him a sort of social conscience. And a social conscience is quite a painful thing to carry around. You can't really ignore it. Anyway, so the net result was that I joined the police, and I joined on a graduate fast-track scheme, which meant I was kind of parachuted into lots of different departments. So I was a detective, I was a community sergeant, I was a custody officer, I did a sort of a detachment to child protection, all sorts of different things, and then specialised as a riot commander, so public order commander, dealing with protesters, demonstrators, large-scale public events, lots of negotiating. It's all about words, it's all about storytelling and influencing, all skills that actually fit very well with being a writer of fiction, telling the narrative of a victim of crime, for example, or listening to the narrative of an unreliable narrator in a suspect interview. So lots that feels very similar. And that's what I did for 12 years.
It's so, wow, there's a lot to unpack there. That's fascinating. And having the social conscious is true, and you would not have you would have not have fed that by being a management consultant. I can almost guarantee you that, because I know a lot of management consultants, and I'm a consultant myself, so so I can see being a police officer, that sense of service would be profound.
Yeah, and particularly in the UK, because I'm guessing you'll have listeners from all over the world, but many from the States. And I do feel that sort of this great urge to now point out that being a police officer in America is very different to being a police officer in the UK. In the UK, police are the people are the police. You are there to keep people safe, to support people. There's a much less, dare I say, aggressive feeling about police in the UK. So it really was a sort of a vocation, I suppose, in the same way that perhaps becoming, going into medicine would have been. But it was creatively unfulfilling.
Sure. Well, and
that's not surprising. And
you've had these creative genes your whole life, as evidenced in everything that you studied before you even went off to university. So I imagine what I've seen in talking to a lot of different authors is that will somehow come out at some point in your life, whether you're feeding it actively or not. In my case, I didn't do anything creative until like one day I started writing in my 30s. And to me, I look back on that moment of that had to come out. So you must go back and look at that inflection point of that walking into that room, knowing that didn't directly feed you into becoming a writer, but had you not, who knows if you would have ever written.
Yeah, absolutely. No, it was one of two sort of sliding door moments, I suppose, that two turning points that really influenced me, because being a police officer, obviously feeds into being a crime writer in terms of, I have a shortcut to research, which is quite helpful, but also it gives you a level of empathy that few jobs do. It brings you into contact with people from all walks of life, so that you're not living in a bubble of, your own type of people, it also teaches you, I think, how fragile that line is between a good life and a bad life, a safe life and an unsafe life. How quickly you can cross over. I remember speaking to a woman on the streets. So I was very, very young in service. It was maybe my first month or two. And there was a young woman who was exactly the same age as me, same month, same year, who was living on the streets in Oxford in the UK, where I was based. And we had gone to university at the same time, and we had both read French, and we were talking about our lives. And what had happened then in our first year of university, is that my life had been stable and I had just carried on and completed my studies. And her father had died, and it had sent her into a kind of spiral, which had led her to taking soft drugs and then hard drugs and not having a family support network. And the result was that here were we talking to each other, and I was in uniform as a police officer and she was a heroin addict on the street. And the only thing that was different was this event that had happened and the lack of family support. And that incident, I think, defined the way I policed for the next 12 years, because it made me understand that we're all capable of ending up in terrible situations, and it defined the way I write for exactly the same reasons.
Yeah, I mean, the key word is empathy, right? I contend that I think the best writing is done from a space of emotion and empathy, because you can very much tell when a writer maybe doesn't possess a lot of empathy, because the characters are often flat, and you don't really necessarily have a lot of passion about them, good or bad. But I don't, I think some people just don't have empathy and some people do. And maybe, certain vocations can foster that. But I think you're right. So like when you're writing, I assume when you're writing maybe what's considered, the antagonist or the villain, it's from a space of, this could be me. This could be you. It's not that far removed. Absolutely. And they're doing what they're doing for a reason, not just because they're evil.
Yes, totally. And the best kind of antagonists have, they have redeeming qualities, they have an origin story, they have a reason, and they sort of have their own moral code. And I think if you've met people like that, then it's much easier to write them.
Yeah, and that's a really interesting point too, because, sometimes you're writing about maybe a villain who has their own moral code, and maybe it's and maybe in that place, it's almost their nature. This is who I am, and I'm not going to make excuses about it. But on the other hand, maybe in your situation, it's almost like this isn't my nature, but this is what I've become through circumstance and through environment. And now I'm doing what I'm doing because it's the only way I can do it, because of the hand I was dealt.
Exactly that.
So So you weren't being fulfilled creatively. And what was that move then? Did you just literally quit your job? Well,
yeah, kind of. But it wasn't driven by the fact that I wasn't being creative. I mean, I guess I just felt, oh, well, I'm in a job where I can't be creative. That's just the way life is. I was writing outside of work. I was writing a blog. Actually, I started as a blogger. And what blogging did was, and this was this was 2008. And there just weren't the number of bloggers. Now everyone and their grandmother has a blog, but back then it was still relatively new, and so you could build a following. And I had a decent following, a good audience, and it was the first time in my life that I'd written that I'd had feedback from strangers, and that was a real turning point. Because
what were you blogging about primarily?
Mostly parenting, the kind of sort of crossover women's sort of issues, I suppose, feminism, grief, a lot about grief. One of my children had died in 2006, and I wrote a lot about sort of parenting through that bubble of grief. And I began to get a lot of emails and messages from people all over the world. And unlike the sort of feedback you get from a teacher or your mum, who are kind of, it's their job to tell you you're great, when you get feedback from a stranger, you can rely on it. That's the impact you've had. And I had an email once from a woman in Australia. I'd written a blog post about postnatal depression, and she wrote and she said, I have been trying to find the words for the way I feel for the last 4 months, and I haven't. I couldn't express myself. And today I read your blog post and I cried, and then I printed it out and I gave it to my husband and I said, this is how I feel, and now I feel like I can get better. And it was such an incredibly powerful moment. And I think it was the first time in my life that I really understood the power of words and thought that I might actually be able to write in a way that resonated with people. And that's when I started writing for other people rather than just for myself. So I was still working as a police officer, but I carried on blogging.
But it's interesting with writing that I think ultimately most of us are writing for ourselves and are kind of unaware that our words do have impact. And it is amazing when you get that feedback. You're like, oh, this part affected me. And you're like, oh, I exactly remember when I was writing that. And I remember what I was thinking, and it wasn't about what is a reader going to think about this. So when you sit down to write now, how focused are you on the reader versus yourself?
That's such a good question. I would say in the early drafts, and I do multiple drafts, in the early drafts, I'm not thinking about the reader at all. Right. Once I get further down the line, that's when I'm wholly focused on how this is going to land with the reader in a variety of ways, how it's going to land emotionally, how it's going to land from a sort of sensitivity point of view. Am I appropriating someone's story? Am I going to offend someone? Am I all sorts of things? I'm really focused on the reader by that point.
Yeah, that's true. And I'll hear the voices in my head, mostly of my agent, my editor, be like, this part I don't know. And then, you change it all in the editing, or maybe you don't change it, but you become more aware of like, I know what they're going to say about this, but I like this part. But I think you have to be true to yourself ultimately, because therein lies the joy of the actual act of writing. For me, at least, is that discovery process. Do you outline with? I mean, I'm kind of guessing you do because of the nature of your books, but I've been surprised before.
I outline obsessively, and we'll have a chapter breakdown before I start writing.
Wow.
And then I'll do a first draft, and then I pretty much throw that away and replot and then write again, because something happens in that first draft that makes me realize I can do it much better. It makes me realize there's a cleverer structure. There's perhaps a stronger POV I could tell it from, or something really fundamental that isn't about making some revisions. It's just about telling the story differently or telling it in a different way, from a different point of view. So I'll replot and then I'll rewrite.
Wow. That's
really inefficient. It's really like if I was in management, if a management consultant came in and analysed me, the first thing they would say is, Claire, you have got to stop throwing your first draft away. It's really inefficient. But I can't stop it.
Yeah, it's the process that works for you and that you've discovered over time. And who's to argue that, against success? Efficiency in writing is boring, right? Like that's, efficiency in writing to me says, we know the cookie cutter formula. We know people like to read it. I can bang this out in 3 months. That doesn't interest me at all. So because I don't think there is joy if you do that, but that also has to be very frustrating a little bit so I don't enjoy the first draft, and I'm in one at the moment, and I'm really struggling. And to be honest, I've found the last I haven't written easily. I was going to say well, and actually the two things are quite different. I haven't written easily since before the pandemic started.
And I know that, some writers have thrived over the last 2 years and others have really struggled. And
how do you define writing easily? What does that look like to you?
Being immersed in the story to the exclusion of anything else, enjoying the writing, and I suppose producing a great number of words. It feels right now like I'm manufacturing a book rather than writing it. It is hard going.
Do you? I'm a little fascinated with the whole throwing out the first draft thing. Do you, when you're
shocked, horrified?
So for example, right now you're working on our first draft. Are you, as you're writing that first draft, are you actively in your mind saying to yourself, I know I'm not keeping this? Or is there this, like, maybe this time it's going to be close to...
So in every other book, I have genuinely, as I'm writing the first draft, I've thought, do you know what? I think it's going to be different this time. And only to be disappointed at the end. With this draft, I think I know it's going to be thrown away, and that doesn't help. It's a new experience for me as well, because I've always written standalones, and I'm launching a crime series this year, and the book that I'm writing now is the second book in a series. So for the very first time, I'm not dealing with a blank page. I'm dealing with a cast of characters that I know and don't have complete control over, and a world that I don't have complete control over because I've already created it. And so I can't suddenly say that X is 20 miles from Y because I've put it being 25 miles or whatever.
Right.
It is both kind of enjoyable to return to a familiar world and slightly constraining. And I think that, coupled with my kind of weird pandemic writing fatigue that I seem to be suffering with, just means that I'm finding it really hard. It feels like paint by numbers. And I know it'll come good, but it's not going to come good in this draft.
Well, so I'm going to project myself here because all I do is write standalones. And I've never written a series. I've had a couple novels that had that shared locations. Oh,
nice. I like that.
Actually, same house, but totally different people. But, I'm just kind of trying to put my, have empathy for what you're going through, because series kind of scare me too, in that for exactly what you described. It's just like, okay, is this going to become rote? Is it going to become formulaic? How do all these crazy things keep happening to this one person? What was that decision-making process to go to do a series? Was it something that was kind of business driven? Was it just interest driven?
Great questions. Also, can I just say, I feel like a little bit like I'm on a therapist's couch, like in a good way. So
this is what the show is for.
Going. You're not going to invoice me, are you?
No.
Bill me at the end. It was definitely not business driven in the beginning. So what happened was, like you, I've never written a series, and I've sort of never tried to write a series. I like standalones. But I wrote a character, I created a world that I wanted to come back to, and I created a character that I loved so much and was so funny and feisty and had so much to say that I thought readers would really love her. And I said to my editor, I think she's a series character. I don't think she's a standalone detective. Because actually, although I've always written crime novels, I haven't written detective novels in the conventional sense. They haven't been procedurals. They've been psychological thrillers. And so the detectives have not been the lead character. Yeah. The woman in peril, as it used to be called, has always been my kind of central character. But here I'd sort of suddenly written this book, which absolutely was a detective novel in a kind of Agatha Christie style. And she sort of demanded to come back, and my editor agreed. And so that was kind of it. And, this series, sort of set itself up. And the more I thought about it from a business point of view, the more I thought that actually this is a sensible decision, because a lot of readers absolutely love series fiction, and some people will only read series fiction. And actually what I want to do further down the line is to alternate. So because one of the other things I struggle with my standalones is that they tend to be quite complex structurally. They require quite a lot of plotting. They require me to think of twists, and twists, aren't necessarily easy to come up with, and I don't ever want them to be easy, because then they won't be.
They need to be kind of organic, or they're very identifiable as a mechanism more than anything else.
Exactly. And so really my ideal is to allow myself not 1 year to come up with a brilliant standalone, but 2 years. And I would like to alternate. So I'd put a series, I do a book a year, I alternate series fiction and standalone. And that's where I want to get to. But I can't do that yet. I need to launch this series. And so I am writing 3 books in the series.
So that's with Source Books.
Yes, yeah, hopefully. I mean, they are publishing The Last Party, and I will go on record as saying I adore them. I do too. I think they are so innovative and creative and responsive, nimble. I've been so impressed with how they've published me.
Who's your editor there?
Don't ask me that, because I've just suddenly gone completely blank. Shayna that's horrible. Yeah. I can't believe I did that. Shayna is.
It's usually either Shayna or Anna. I'm with Anna.
I'm with Shayna. And I just really love them. So yeah, I think it comes out in the fall with you. It's either October or November, whereas we've got it a little bit sooner in the summer in the UK. Yeah. So that's where I'm at. So I'm writing number 2, and hopefully by the time you stream this podcast, I will have got through this slightly sticky stage. I had a meeting with my UK editor. So the UK is my lead market. So my UK editor is the one that I would sort of talk things through with at this stage. And she's been very, very good. And she hasn't asked me how the book's going, but I thought I should probably bring it up because deadlines are getting closer. And I said, look, I'm finding it tough, and I'm stuck at 30,000 words, and I've been here for what seems like weeks. She said, what do you want to do? And I said, I think I need to scare myself into finishing it. And so with that in mind, I will hand in this book in whatever state it's in at the end of June. So I've got 5 or 6 weeks to write this book.
To write the first draft, which you're going to throw away.
Write the first draft, which I'm going to throw. Well, this is kind of my point, is that if I'm going to throw it away anyway, then what's the point in taking another month, fast and furious, and then we can look at it, see what's wrong, see what's right, make a plan, and then I can write the actual draft.
I feel stressed out.
Oh, don't! I thought you were going to say, "Oh, that's fine. That's loads of time. This is all good." Oh. What's your process then? Make me feel bad.
I don't know. I write what I find enjoyable, and then my editor gets it and says, "What is this?" And so now I'm in the process of gutting, my novel, and she's pretty flexible with timing. I mean, it's going to come out probably late next year, but it's so interesting too, because I'm really rewriting this book. I mean, somebody who died early on now is going to be alive much longer, which is a lot of work to do. Whole sections just gone, replaced with other ones. But because it's Source Books, and they're very analytical and they're very ahead of everything, we're already talking about covers and titles, even though the book's not even fully done yet. And so it's just interesting to me. And they, and literally this morning we were emailing about titles, and and they have this proprietary system whereby they test all these titles and things like that. So it's just really strange to me, that it just is such a process. But I guess that's the nature of it.
It is. I mean, I think we see that even more so in self-publishing, and I have so much respect and awe for independently published authors, because I just know I couldn't do it. But I see them, put books on sale for pre-order that they haven't started yet, and seeing those pre-orders come in before they've written the book, and it's a pressure that I don't think I'd handle very well.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I'm a book a year person. And I typically usually sell one at a time. This last one was a 2-book deal, but they're all standalone. So I'm not under pressure to get it done, but I write every day, and I also have a full-time job. So I only write, in the evenings a little bit.
Okay. So I think I need to hear this. I need to hear your routine, because one of the problems I've got, I think I'm being a bit of a princess about all of this. Like,
you can't be a princess.
I have a lot of time. I mean, don't get me wrong, life is busy, but this is my full-time job. Right. And yet I think I spend a lot of time staring at the screen going, oh my God, I can't write this. It's all too hard. And then going and getting a piece of cheese. So tell me, how do you fit writing into your life? So,
I've never made enough money to do this, and I'm kind of the breadwinner. So I've never been able to quit my other job. So understanding that, I put myself in a position of like, okay, how do I fit this into my daily life? Like exercise, like other things that are important to me. So I write 1 hour a day, usually from like 5 to 6 p.m. I have my cocktail with me. And unlike you, I don't outline anything. I have zero idea what's going to happen in the next 2 or 3 chapters, much less the entire book. So to me, when I sit down and I pull that door shut and I'm alone in that room, that's exciting, because it's like, what's going to happen now? I don't know. Let's figure it out. And that's where the joy comes in for me. So I do that every day, 365 days a year. And with that, I can get a draft done, 8-9 months. And then, a lot of rewriting. Then I start getting feedback from agents and my agent editor and that kind of a thing. But so it's, but that being said, this last book has taken me a lot longer just because I've had time to do it and I wanted to explore that. And now I'm doing extensive rewrites on it. But
and how many words would you generally write in that hour with your cocktail? Also, what cocktail is it?
So I make a vodka gimlet. So it's just vodka, fresh squeezed lime juice, and a little bit of simple syrup. It's very 1950s.
That sounds lovely.
It's great.
Just the one during the hour, or do you sort of?
Usually just the one during the hour. Okay. And 500 to 650 words, something like that. And if I'm editing,
that's really achievable.
It's very achievable. I mean, that's the whole thing. It's not, I say that to newer authors all the time. It's not that hard. All that being said, when I first started writing, it was the physical act of writing was terribly difficult because I didn't really know how to do it, and so everything was like a battle. Now,
and also you stress about stupid things like, should this go in a new paragraph, and like, where do the speech marks go? Like, it's all the mechanics of writing,
right? And now it just becomes your style, and it's like, my sentences might be 2 words, and then, or what paragraph could be 3 words, and then but just also knowing that it can all get fixed later, because the hardest part of writing is getting that first draft done. I think I don't throw mine away, so that definitely helps. But we're in a few minutes. We're going to do some storytelling, but I wanted to talk just a little bit about.
Are we?
We are.
You didn't tell me this.
You didn't know this was part of the deal?
No.
Oh. Well, I'll explain that in a minute. But I wanted to just talk to you a little bit about the business side of things, because just looking at your online presence. You're very active beyond writing. You're very active.
This is why I don't get any writing done, isn't it?
Well, so, and the Craft Fest thing that I'm teaching is on marketing from the perspective of like, hey, I'm not an expert in this. I'm an author who's realizing there's all this stuff you have to do, and you don't have to do all of it, but here are some tips. Like, what have you found to be essential that you have to do, as opposed to like, the things that you're being told that you should do, but you just don't do it?
I'm not told that I should do anything.
Okay, well, that's good.
And I don't think anyone has to do anything. I think you can just write great books. But I also think that every author should try and take a bit more agency, and that there is a lot of power imbalance in publishing, which makes it leads to authors feeling so grateful to be published that they forget that they are the one with the power. And so if I could give any kind of message to authors, particularly new authors starting out, it would just be to try and kind of remind themselves of the fact that they are the one with the product, that without this brilliant book that you've written, none of the rest of it is going to happen. And if we all said, right, I'm going to start a company as an author, and I'm going to be the boss, the CEO, then we'd run things very differently. But what we do is we kind of put ourselves as the lowest employee of our company, when in fact we should be at the top. So from my point of view, I see myself as the CEO, occasionally the president if I'm having a really good day, of my company. And so it's really important to me that stays on brand, and that, I'm proactive in how I grow that business and reach new readers. And for me, a really important part of that is my online presence. If I had to lose everything but one element of my marketing strategy, I would keep my mailing list. And that would be the most important thing. If authors haven't started a mailing list, then start one today. It's not difficult. It's not expensive. Certainly not when you're starting out and you've only got, a few names. The brilliant thing about mailing lists is, you own it. You own it in a way that you can't ever own your Facebook platform or your Instagram followers, because those platforms could be taken down tomorrow. But also, nobody on your mailing list knows how many people are on that list. So you can talk to people in a real kind of smoke and mirrors way. You could write as though you've got thousands of people on your mailing list, and actually it's just, one person you met at an event, and right, your mum and your neighbor. And you can build a real relationship with people. So my list is really important to me. I run it as a book club because I'm uncomfortable sending monthly letters that are all about me. I prefer to send newsletters that have a bit of me, but are also about, here are some great books. Here's a book that we're all going to read together this month and talk about online, raising some other voices. So yeah, that's really important. And yes, I spend quite a lot of time, too much time, on social media. Although I have dialed that back.
That's good. Yeah, I'm the same as you in terms of the newsletter. That is my sacrosanct, entity that and the same day every month. And I write actually a lot of personal stuff, because to me it's kind of cathartic to saying, here's some things that I'm going through, or here's what's happening with my kids. Because I think readers like that.
Of course they do. So I'm going to sign up to your newsletter. Where will I find it?
Just carterwilson.com. Thank you so much. And I will do the same. And it's such a great takeaway, your point about being the CEO and on good days president of your company, because I think by default, most authors, and I include myself in this, are very humbled and almost embarrassed by their writing and feel very much unworthy of being published. And so it's very hard to then take a position of authority within that company with that kind of mindset. So I think it's great because you said that, I'm like, oh my God, that's a great takeaway for me to realize, like, no, I am, this happens because of what I'm doing. And I'm still a part of a huge team that's getting these books to get out there, but maybe elevating my own role in that a little bit more. So thank you for that. So here's the storytelling part. So so you really didn't know about this?
No.
All right. So I'm going to go easy on you, but that's the whole point of the show, Making It Up, is that we choose a book and we choose a random page and a random sentence. I'm going to read that sentence, and you're going to give me a couple more sentences of whatever you think goes next for that story, and then I will do the same, and we just go back and forth for a couple minutes.
Oh my word! Okay, so this is like a living hell. Why has no one briefed me on this?
Oh,
I demand to see my manager.
Well, but it's very easy because we have a few different options. I can go first, or we can certainly just talk about what the story would be.
Yo, let's do it.
Okay,
I'm on a roll. I'm going to go improv.
And what this is going to do is this is going to unlock whatever issues you're having with writing during the pandemic. And you're going to leave this and you're going to get that draft done by the end of June.
Why, thank you, Therapist Wilson.
So I just grabbed 3 books from my bookshelf. So I have Peter Straub's The Throat. I'm going to have you choose one of these. The Ruins by Scott Smith. And John Case's The Syndrome. So all fiction.
You've chosen 3 male authors for me.
Oh, well, male author names. Who knows if they're pen?
Okay, let's go for, what was that last one, John?
John Case's The Syndrome.
The Syndrome. I like that cover. Let's go for that.
Okay, give me a page between 1 and 500.
365.
Okay. And then a sentence between 1 and 10.
9.
Okay. So this is just a description. So I'm going to read this, and then if you want to go first, just give me a couple more sentences, or you tell me to go first. But the sentence is this. All the rooms on the ward had large windows facing out on the corridor.
She looked through the window and was horrified to see the very thing she had hoped never to see again.
She thought he was dead, but he was standing right there, looking exactly the same as when she had last seen him. That same stupid, smug smirk on his face. She had to make a decision to go through the door and confront him or to run away. But she felt like she was always running away.
I feel quite invested. Would he recognize her? She wondered. It had been many years. She'd changed her appearance more times than she could count. She'd left town more times than she could count, but still she found herself coming back to this place. What was it about this place that had such a pull?
She looked down, opened up her purse, and checked to see if it was there. And it was. It was always there. 4 inches of steel, always kept sharp, just in case. She closed her purse, opened the door, and walked directly to him. We can stop it there.
I'm going to stop because
okay.
I'm going to stop. This is hilarious.
It's fun though, right?
It is. So it is fun. But do you know what? It's funny because you're absolutely right that it does make you kind of start sparking. Like in my head, the reason she's so surprised to see him there is because she killed him. So how the hell has this happened? And so I'm thinking it's quite a good exercise maybe to do, you know, if you are feeling a bit creatively blocked, maybe in a writing group or, you know, with some peers.
Well, the other thing, I mean, because it truly is improv. And, you know, I know writers who take improv classes, and it forces them to think on the moment and to react from a place often of emotion in order to kind of move the story forward. And I always say this, the whole point of improv is that you have to accept the other person's whatever they're giving you. That's the whole yes and you can't just say no, that didn't happen, this happened. And I think that is so good for creativity because it makes you extremely vulnerable. And I think being vulnerable really does open up creative outlets. I'm fully convinced of that. So Anyway.
Yes, and of course it's a very different process to say if you handed in your book and you were getting edits and your editor was saying, I think maybe this should happen here, is of course you don't have to say yes to that. It's not a yes and. So when you get those sorts of edit notes, how often do you think they've got it right, and how often do you challenge it or keep?
Well, and this goes back to my feelings about having imposter syndrome as a writer. I get, first of all, when I get edit notes, they're always pretty smart, and by the time, as you finish a book, you lose a lot of context for it because you've just been in it so much. And so you have an appreciation for somebody who's seen it for the first time. So I'd say probably 90% of the notes are ones that I'm like, wow, this is going to make the book better. And the ones that I don't necessarily agree with are usually the smaller ones. How about you?
So when I get edits, I go immediately into what I affectionately call the pit of despair for about 36 to 48 hours, when I start looking at job vacancies in supermarkets.
Right.
So I do that, and my husband just avoids me because
every author says the exact same thing.
Every time. And then I come back and I read the edit notes and I think, it's all of it's right. All of it. It's very, very rare that I come across something that I don't think is smart.
How many times have they given you notes that are things that you actually included in the first draft that you threw away?
Do you know? Never.
That's good.
Never.
But also,
mostly, ever since my second book, I have sent my very first draft to my editor. So I don't polish my first draft. I send that dirty draft to my editor, warts and all. I'm not ashamed of how badly it's written, because I know I can pull it out of the bag eventually.
Right. Well, that's good. Well, listen, it was such a wonderful pleasure talking to you, and I'm looking forward to seeing you in New York City, and congratulations on getting away from your family for a week. Well,
don't let them hear you say that. I am going to make myself a gimlet now that it's almost 6:00 in the UK.
They're very good.
Try and feel inspired by both our short but enjoyable storytelling, and also your work ethic, which is laudable. I'm going to try and model myself on you now.
I think you're doing just fine. Well, thanks again for talking with me, and I look forward to seeing you soon.
Absolute pleasure. Bye.
Take care, Claire. Bye. That was my conversation with Clare Mackintosh. She was great. I had a fantastic time, and I was so thrilled to be able to meet her in person shortly after I taped this interview. And I'm hoping to see her again maybe at BoucherCon, the World Mystery Writers Convention in September. If you want to know more about Clare, please hop over to her website at claremackintosh.com. And she's got a lovely newsletter and all sorts of stuff on there. If you want to find out more about me or my books or my appearances, or subscribe to my newsletter, which is also lovely, just go to carterwilson.com. That's it for now. More episodes coming out very soon. In the meantime, thanks for watching and or listening. Take care.